Welcome to a new episode of How It Works with Holger. Today, a topic that always leads to major discussion with customers, I'm not going to lie about it, how you can add version control to your project. And I don't know why this is such a big thing for a lot of Delphi developers. I'm honestly shocked most of the time. The huge number of people still just using zip archives, naming zip archives with the date. Okay, this is the zip archive from yesterday. This is the zip archive from last week. And then we have different folders on our server with all the different months and years. And why? Version control is there for you to use. And the best thing is, the number one system that is available is free. There is no licenses tied to it. It's free. And then the most common misconception, let me clear it up right now. You don't need to use any of the big cloud servers. You don't need to. You don't need to use GitHub. You don't need to use Bitbucket. You can use whatever you want to use in your own company. Meaning, the first step is to have a repository locally for your system. And then you can add servers to that repository, as it is called, and sync with those. But that is not a requirement. Still, another big thing about version control is that you have security, that if your computer, your laptop breaks, you still have a copy of all the versions. That's the key of the progress. You check in regular intervals and you can go back and forth. And the best thing is you can have different branches of development. For example, if you tell your junior developer, hey, we have this web application, it uses Bootstrap, can you try Tabler instead and see what it looks like? So that developer is going to branch and you can still develop in your project. And then the junior developer is going to come back to you and say, hey, look at it. You say, oh, this is great. So then you can merge in the changes that that developer made without waiting for him. So all these are big, big advantages of collaboration and also of security, that the code isn't on your disk somewhere in some obscure archive. And then you're like, when did I make that change? And mostly, and this is the biggest concern for me, you don't realize what kind of changes you make in what file over a certain progress of time. I've had quite a few discussions with customers where they're like, oh, we just changed this here. And then you look there and there is a change. However, there were quite a few other files that were affected. And if you put things under version control, you stay in control. And you don't have to even think about the changes you make. And if you find out, oh, that didn't work out as I expected it would work out, well, guess what? You can go back. You can revert the changes. All advantages. So today, we are going to put an existing project. That's the main thing, because nobody wants a solution that basically tells you, oh, start off like this fresh. You all have your projects. So today, I'm going to show you how you can put an existing system, an existing project under version control first locally, and then we're going to add GitHub as a repository, a private repository to it. But if you don't like this, there is an alternative that you can install in your network very easily. Then everything stays in your network. There is no need to use any external servers. If you would like to follow along and would try it with one of your own projects, it's very easy. Just download Git for Windows, of course, because we develop with Windows when we use Delphi. And there is a 64-bit version and a 32-bit version for 64-bit and 32-bit Windows, obviously. I always use the installer one, but there's also a portable version that doesn't even require an installer. The key thing is you might have downloaded this before in order to activate or tinker around with the Git integration that is part of Delphi, but we're not even going to be that complicated. Today I'm simply going to show you how to use the command line with this, because this tool installs something into your Windows Explorer that gets you right started. So we're not even going to make it that complicated today. You can also see the second tab here, GitKraken. That is the client that I recommend to be used. I think GitKraken has clear advantages over other tools, but that is for a later day, because we're not going to need that today right away. Maybe in the end I show you an example why a client like this can be advantageous and why a client like this gives you even more information than just using the command line. So let's get started with an existing project that I have on my disk. Looking at the Explorer, on my drive D, I have the XData ODP project. That is something I'm working on. I'm trying to record a new training course. And here in this directory, I have all sorts of stuff. I have my assets, which are my pictures. I have a binary directory. There's nothing compiled in there. I have common classes. I have some Google OTP, which is from GitHub itself. That's why there's a license and everything. So that is something that you would consider a third-party library. Then I have an example for the VCL to use a VCL project, another VCL project, and a web project built with TMS Web Core. So there's like CSS files, JavaScript files, and then there is a TMS Web Core project, another one, and the actual server project with yet more resource files and the actual server sources. I think this is a pretty good example for a non-simple 1, 2, 3 project, which you usually see when you look up examples like that, how to put stuff under version control. And another thing I prepared that is going to come into play a little bit later, I prepared 2 files, the git ignore and git attributes. And this is what I want to start with right away. The git ignore is something you might have seen when you download sources from the internet that is in there, and the git attributes the same thing. The git ignore file specifies files that are not supposed to be put under version control. And then you might be like, well, I want to put everything under version control. Of course you want to, but let's say you have source code and this source code can be compiled into an executable or into a library. You don't want to put that executable under version control. Even though Git can use both binary files and text files, that's not going to be difficult. Like your images and everything will be put under version control, no problem there. However, you don't want executables to be put there or other stuff like DCU files. You don't want those files to land in version control because they're a result of the compilation process. They're not part of your source code. There might also be stuff like specific configurations, and what I always struggle with, have an issue with, the binary directory here might get a DB directory at some point, meaning local databases, SQLite databases. Those things I add to the git ignore file so that they don't land in my source control, which is supposed to be for each and everyone working on the project. And as soon as there's something in there that is user specific for me, I don't want to put it under version control. With regards to Delphi, this is extracted from an existing source control that I have. So this is already filtered out. But let's say I open up the project, for example, the XData server project here. At some point, I would get user definition files, maybe even desktop files. All these files don't need to be in there. Same for the IDE. It creates a history folder. It creates backup files. All these files we don't want to have in version controls because we have the backups by checking in and basically keeping the progress of the file in our own system. So with that, we can create this file that allows us to filter those specific files out. But let's start with the actual Git repository first, and then we'll look at that in detail. Let me just show you the file real quick, what it looks like. It's just a text file. And if Windows shows me the dialog I need, here's all the files that you don't want to see in there. DCP, DCU, EXE, DLL, all that kind of stuff. But also, and this is something I always or did not realize at first, you can also put directories in there. For example, .vs Code, TMS Web Intermediate, which is a folder that is generated when you compile the TMS Web Core project. Win64, Win32, that cancels out all binaries that Delphi creates by default, just like debug or something like .user, which you see here, which is something specific that the IDE creates, or here the together diagrams that are generated sometimes, desktop files, and of course zip files, seven zip files, all these kind of things. And this is a living document, by the way. At some point you will add stuff. Usually what you can do is you pick up a file which is generated for a certain language. It's pretty good, but the best thing to do is to ask somebody who is actually a Delphi developer and has things under version control. I myself asked Ian Barker for his git ignore file, and thankfully he provided me a starting point when I got started with Git. Ian was much quicker than I was when it came to Git. I used a different version control before, SVN, and as I got started with Git, I realized how much simpler it is. So this is why I'm going to explain Git and not SVN subversion. So looking at our project here, and after installing the Git software, which is compiled for Windows, in Explorer, if you right click, you see that you get Git GUI here and Git Bash here. These two menu items are added by the bare bones Git stuff that you install. I also have additional tools. Here you see the Git Kraken tool that I use, and also here for SVN I still have my Tortoise SVN. There is also Tortoise Git, for example. A lot of people use the Git desktop, I think it's called. So there's many different tools out there. Here I'm going to give you the bare bones basic Git Bash, and it opens up in the folder that you enabled it. So right now this is in this folder, and I don't even know, it even has Linux commands. So you can say ls. Does it also have dir? Yes. So you can pick which language you want to use, either ls or dir for directory. There's no need to learn Linux or any specific commands. We're going to use the Git specific command. So if you say Git version, you see that the Git command line client is directly accessible here. And the first command we need to learn is git, and I'll leave the Explorer window in the background intentionally because all our actions will have consequences on the file system, we would assume, right? So I type git, and then let me also take this out of the background so we have a nice black and white difference here. Good. So in order to start, we need to initialize a repository, and that's what you use git init for. And when that happens, you get the feedback and initialize empty git repository. And here, the .git folder, that might be something you don't see. You can see that's a little bit grayed out. The reason why I see it is I, in view show, enabled hidden items. That's important. If I disable that, the Git disappears. So in order to see it, you need to enable hidden items in your Explorer window. As a developer, that is usually the case. Usually you enable hidden folders. Going on now, we have it under version control. You can, if you look at other folders, this .git is an indicator that this folder is under version control. The subfolders don't have it, as you can see. It's only in the main folder right here, and that means you enabled Git for this. In layman terms, it means now you have the ability to, that Git monitors changes, but it's not like there's something running in the background and it's going to take resources away. No, you have to indicate what you want to be put under version control, meaning which files do you want to add to your source repository. That is a major difference to zip archives or whatever you might have been used to before, meaning just because the files are here inside of your directory, they have not been added to version control yet. In order to add something to Git that it monitors the progress of the file, you say git add, and then, for example, here the Flix OTP group project file is a very good file to use. So we say that, boom, and then we added this file to the repository. However, you also already see a warning message that line feeds will be replaced by CRLF, meaning that if you have only line feeds in there, they will be replaced by the Windows standard carriage return line feed. And that is what the second standard file, the Git attributes file, is for. You can tell Git what should happen with certain line endings, that you end up with the line endings that you want. Again, I got this one from Stefan Glinke, who is the author of Spring 4D. He uses Git too, and he basically pointed out to me after making a blog post about git ignore, Holger, the Git attributes file is even more important. So these are the two files that we're now actually going to copy over. So go in here, copy, and paste. And looking at the Git attributes file, it tells us that pass files have end-of-line endings, carriage return line feed, DFM files, which are the form description files, same, and DPR, same. I guess I should add star.group project in there as well. End of line is carriage return line feed, and that's it. And by default, for all the other files, I use auto, which is basically the same thing what is happening here right now. By default, everything is determined automatically. We need to add those files to our repository. So once again, git add.git ignore, and we can add multiple git attributes. Obviously, you can use wildcards and everything. You can also do git add dot. But the key is here, before you do that, be sure that you have your git ignore and git attributes in there, because it adds everything that is in all the subfolders. And if you have binary files in there, those would be added as well if Git isn't aware of your git ignore file. You might think this is it. You have now all your files under version control. Well, there's actually a 3-step process. If you say git status, it gives you status, what has been added yet. So it tells you, well, we are on the main branch. As I said, you can have many different branches of development going on. By default, it's main. That's the main branch that you worked on. And if you get started, please do me a favor, don't start branching left and right. Start working with the main branch. Obviously, it's difficult if you work in a big team and you only use the main branch in the beginning. But if you learn, you most likely will learn on your own one-man system first. And so the main branch is good. No commits. A commit is actually it's a collection of files that you added to the version control, and you commit the changes and you name these changes. You'll see that in a second. So right now we have added the file git attributes, git ignore, and Flix OTP group project. That's what we staged those files. Staging is what gets committed. So these 3 files here would now get committed as a single version, so to speak. And down here, untracked files, this is all not tracked, not under version control. So with this, we can now say git commit, and then we can either press enter and then a notepad or whatever window will pop up and will us allow to describe what we did. But it's much easier to use -m and then say, for example, initial commit with ignore files. That's what I always call it. And then press enter. And now these 3 files that have been changed, and it made these changes and added them as a commit into the repository. Perfect. That's it. Now these 3 files will always be under version control, and it might be a little bit underwhelming. Well, how easy it is, right? And we haven't gotten our whole project in there yet. So let's add one thing, a README file. That is something that should always happen. So we can say copy con. You see, I started with MS-DOS, readme.md or Markdown. And oh, see, this is interesting. This is a as I said, this is a bash. This is not MS-DOS, so this actually can't do that. So maybe it can echo example readme on my project. Let's see, and this goes into readme.md. That worked. So here we have our readme.md file. How do we add it? Git add readme. And then what do we need to do in order to add this as a commit? We can say git commit. We can also, of course, do git status first to see what is going on. We see that we added one new file, readme.md. So we say git commit added readme. Boom, that's it. So now we have a second commit, and here you see the ID, the identifier of this commit. Great, isn't it? And now you can even, if you make changes, this is how it works. So let's say we make a change to here, and we say this is an example how to use version control. Save. And now we say git status, and we see that readme.md has been modified. Great, huh? So we need to stage these changes. So we would need to say git add readme.md, and then we say git commit updated readme. And let's be real, nobody would do that. Nobody would use the console in this way and check out all the things every single time. So if people don't want to make the investment of, there's even some clients that are free to have a user interface, they do this. They say git add dot. So this will put everything under version control. And then they say git, we added everything, so git status will now, as you can see, have everything in there that was in all the directories. Everything is now a new file. And then I can say git commit message added project. Wow, that's it. Now everything is under version control. And you might be like, how can I see what changes I made? You can say, for example, git log, and then you get the whole history for everything, you know, what you did for, but you can also say git quit, git log readme.md, for example. Then it gives you the 2 commits that this was affected. Readme, first you added it, and then you made a change to it. And then, of course, you can also say, what did I change? Git diff readme.md. and there is no change because it always compares with the last commit. You know, this is something I have not explained so far. Obviously, your local repository is at a certain stage right now, correct? Like you checked in all the changes, but nobody keeps you from going backwards and forwards in time. And then there are commits that are after where you are right now and before you are right now. However, to do these things, you can already see it, to do these things on the console does not really make a lot of sense, don't you think? I think a graphical representation helps us much more than just looking at this console. However, the steps that I have given you to initialize the repository and to add these few files, the git ignore and the git attributes, is a good starting point. Because what I can do now, and this is Gitkraken, it's free as long as you use it locally, I think. And as soon as you want to connect to a server and deploy everything, it has to be, I think if it's GitHub, it has to be a public repository. There are certain restrictions for the free version. However, the professional version that you can install, and this is one of the main things I always emphasize about Gitkraken. You can, if you're a developer, you usually have, like I have, multiple virtual machines, and there's no hassle with software activation or whatever. I'm the developer, I log in with my profile, and I can use it in multiple virtual machines, for example, and Gitkraken is fine with that because I paid as a developer for my license. So as long as each developer pays for a license, you can use it in multiple VMs. For example, I also have it like on the, if I want to check something out on the host system that hosts the VM, it's also possible to use the same license. So license management with Gitkraken is bliss, and the price for a license is well below $100 for a year. So it's really not an issue if you do software development, for what you get out of it in the long term. So I right click here and I say open with Gitkraken. You can also start Gitkraken manually and then say, hey, which is the directory you want to open. So let me switch to full screen. And here is the difference. See, it was already open here in a different tab. You can create workspaces so that the same projects are open at the same time. But right now, just opening this, we get this wonderful view. On the bottom is the earliest commit. And then here you go. We did an initial commit with ignore files. What did we affect? You go to the right. These are the files that you added. Then we added the README. This is the README we added. Then we updated the README. And now, what changes did I make, huh? Let's click on the file. And there we go. The green is what we added, plus this is what we added. Amazing, huh? And clicking here to close it. And this is possible for all the different commits. You can also compare different commits with each other, files of different commits with each other. It's amazing the kind of view of your source you get, the additional insight. And going down here, these are all the files that we added. Of course, there are no changes, Before, the file was empty, and then we add all this. So everything is green because everything was added. Let me go over to the same project that I work with. I worked with this right from the start. I put it under version control on 27th of January. And as you can see, I added git attributes and git ignore. That is my starting point. I added those files. And then I start building a project in Delphi. I add all the different files. I add the assets. And I create for each and every thing I do. For example, here I added all the different images. Here I added the server template. You see that it's also in a different directory. Everything I do gets a different commit. And This way, I can see the progress of my development really, really easily. Let's see, I updated for example, here, I completed the login server implementation. So I go to what did I add? So here you see all the things that I updated. So I removed this. That's what I see. Or for example, here I replaced authenticate with authorize because authenticate is wrong. It's literally, I made a typo, so this is the mistake that I made. And here I changed the login password was another typo I made. See, I had login password as an integer, and of course login and password have to be a string, and only the one-time password is supposed to be a code, so it's an integer. So you really, really see that you can reproduce what changes you made. You can, if you wanted to, you could provide patches of this sort. If you ever want to provide patches on your source code or whatever, that's all there. Another thing you see in this pretty simple example is that I have the main branch right here, but there's now something different, which is called web_bs. It's not the word that you think it is, it stands for Bootstrap, because here I decided when I was done with my project, hey, let's merge and do the user interface using Bootstrap. So I did a Bootstrap enabled version of the web application. Okay, and now I can see, this is a pretty good example, all the changes that I made. I added a Bootstrap utils class, I added the Bootstrap specific HTML, and of course, I had to make some changes. Oh, there were some changes to the server container because, of course, I needed to add the middleware. You can reproduce what you did pretty easily. That's the main thing. And at some point, I might decide that this Bootstrap version is actually the version that I'm going to use as my main version, meaning I want to use this for my main development. I've decided, well, this is actually great. This is what I want to keep. I don't want to keep the other version. So I pull this over here, drag this to main, and then I can say merge web into main. I click here. And now what happens is a wonderful graphical representation of what I did. So up till here, I was in main, and then I started working on a different feature. This could be another person, for example. This could be the junior developer that you tell, hey, do this in Bootstrap. I built the web design for you. While this person is working on this brand, you can keep working, right? The changes will be merged in, even if you make changes on the same file. Git is so freaking smart. It will be able to figure out what you added, what this person added. Of course, there might be conflicts when you change the same line of code. Then you will be led through an interactive process that will allow you to basically decide which of the changes you're going to keep. Again, on the left side, you're going to see yours. On the right side, you're going to see the other person's, and then you can decide which one you're going to take. Kind of like if you've ever worked with Beyond Compare, that kind of view is what you'll get. And the nice thing here is that you get this right here. So at this point, this branch has been merged into main. So at this point, main will be exactly the state from this branch here. So you merge it in there. However, and this is where this Git Kraken client is so great, and I'm quite sure other clients have a similar view on things. But the main thing to see here is, where are you? And if you go to your local repository, this is what you have on your disk. You see that I have two branches right now, the web.bs and the main. And you can see very easily which of the two, how far you're back, because you can see on the computer right now, you are in main, right? But you are still not up to date. That is the thing, because what I do here is I work on my local system. You never work with any server or anything like it. Forget about any server, because Git is a system. All actions that you do, if you work on your computer, are on your local repository. And for a local repository, you can work on different branches at the same time, which I do here. I worked on WebBS. This is the current one, meaning when I make changes, I affect this branch. If I want to go back and forth, and this is what makes the command line so complicated, you would have to switch between branches. You would have to keep a view on things. You don't have a graphical representation of what is going on. And this is what makes Gitkraken so great. You immediately see what is going on. And going back to our very, very simple example, we see exactly what is going on. The problem that we have right now is we do not have a copy of it. It's on our computer, so if our computer were to get lost, we would have a problem. And this is where remote comes in. And this is where you can add a so-called, how would you call it, an endpoint, so to speak, that you can basically communicate with to sync your repository with. And it needs to be a Git capable server on the other side. As said, it can be Bitbucket, it can be GitHub. I forget 1,001. Maybe I just click here on plus. So you see there's GitLab, Bitbucket, GitHub, or custom. So for example, here at home, I use a custom URL because I have my own Git server running. For this, we're going to use GitHub, and it would even create this for me here. So I can go to private, that I am the only person that I want to be the one that has access to it, nobody else. And then you can go into GitHub and basically make the proper changes. Who is allowed to access this? And then people can access your source code, pull it to their local system, make changes, and then push the changes to your repository. Okay, so not to complicate things though, let's stay on track how you would be able to push this into a GitHub repository just for yourself to get started with. And I promised I won't make it dependent on Gitkraken. I give you the solution that is viable for everything. So we go to the browser, we go to github.com, and I immediately go to my own repository here, GitHub/Holger Flick. This is what it would look like. Obviously, you won't have any repositories normally. And then we go here, click on the plus sign, new repository, and you're the owner. Repository name is FLXOTP. It tells you if it's available. Remember, this is always with your name. So even if it's a repository name that is already taken, for example, JCL, which is the Delphi JCL, because I synced it I forked it, so to speak. It's not available anymore, but anything that is already taken, it's always local to you're the owner of things. So you can use it without problems. Flix OTP example project. And here you say private. You would be able to add README and a git ignore, and here you go. You can enter Delphi, and then you automatically have your Delphi git ignore template, which you might want to use. However, if you want to link an existing repository to GitHub, don't add a README, don't add a git ignore, because otherwise it won't work easily, because then you have two different starting points. You have one starting point without anything and another starting point from GitHub. And I'm quite sure it is possible to merge the two, but the problem is they have different starting points and you can only merge things that started off from the same root. So I always create everything completely empty, like this, create a repository. And then GitHub gives you exactly what I've explained so far. You create your README MD file, you you add the README, you create your first commit, and then something to make sure that you're on the main branch, they add that here. So you git branch to main, and then you add, and this is the key command that we need to execute. We add this URL here, that's something you get from GitHub, to your repository as a remote. Remote is meaning this is a remote server away, and then it needs an identifier. And by default, the one that you use primarily is called origin. That's just how it is. Origin is like just a name. You can name it I don't know, backup or whatever, but that's just not used. People name it origin because then you can say git push, and then you can say where do you want to push it to origin, and what do you want to push? You want to push the main branch. And as soon as that is set up, you basically can always do git push you origin main all the time without initializing it, adding the files, and so on and so on. So for us, these are the commands that we need to execute because we have everything already set up. We only need to add the remote. We need to basically make main the main branch, the default branch, and then we can basically push it away. With Git Kraken, however, it's much easier. You simply copy paste this URL here. By the way, you at a later point you get it on the right upper corner. So this is the URL you need to copy. Here's also the direct link for GitHub Desktop. Ian Barker, for example, prefers using GitHub Desktop, which is something like Git Kraken. And then I can go here, add a remote URL, and then I simply paste it in here, and I name it origin, and say add remote. It's the same as executing those commands I have just shown you on the command line that it also gives me right here. So it doesn't really matter, especially Git Kraken or any other client is going to pick up on these things that you ask. So it doesn't really matter if you use the command line or if you use a client. It doesn't matter. It ends up to be the same result. So add a remote. And then here we have the remote. And what happens now is we have local and remote. And you get these icons here. So this computer here means that this is where locally you are, but your remote is not there. You see, because there's not the tiny little origin logo here. So we need to push. And that means you push the changes from your local repository to the remote. And if you do this the first time here, I'm quite sure, see, it will ask me, what remote branch should main push and pull? So I say the local main is tied to origin main, which is the same on the remote server. So you map it. And inside of the command line, you do it right here. You say locally, this is it, main, and then you say, hey, you push origin main because you already selected main locally. This is what main will be on origin, okay? So it's more complicated using the console, definitely, and this makes it easier. Just click submit, and now we see that the icon here for the server and for the local machine are both here. So the server is on the same stage as the computer locally is. And now if we go to GitHub and press enter, it's all there. And even we have a fancy README for my project right here. And you can browse your code right here. And everything is in there now. And you get, as you can see, 21 minutes ago, I've been talking for a long time. This is not when you push it, this is when you did the checksums, because your local system is keeping track of the versioning, not the server, right? Big difference to other versioning systems. Yeah, this was 24 minutes ago. And even now online, so now online you can serve on your repository. For example, you click on README and you get like, hey, latest commit is, then you can click on history and there you see all the different changes you made. And then you can also get the diff view at this point, the history, I think. This is commit details. And there you see the changes that you made, kind of like what you get with the Git Kraken client. So GitHub is not only a storage container, it gives you also great user interface to do the same thing. And if you don't want to, for whatever reason, deploy to GitHub, because this is private, nobody can access it. If you have proper security measures in place, then nobody will be able to access this. GitHub has two-factor authentication, and this is really the most important thing. If you go here on settings, and then you go down to developer settings, you can generate personal access tokens. And I don't use these fine-grained ones. I don't even know what it is. I use Tokens Classic. And this is where you can generate tokens instead of passwords. So you use this UI to generate a token, and this token becomes your new password that you use with the GitHub repository. Because there's one thing that Git Kraken did automatically for me when I pushed to the server. When you do this on the console, when you push for the first time, it's going to ask you for a username and for a password. And depending on your system settings, once again, there's also a GitHub configuration, not a GitHub, a Git configuration file that determines things like, do you want to store the password and stuff like that. I store the passwords on my local machine. Otherwise, you have to enter it each and every single time. I've given you so much information now. How is there a way that you can read about this? Yes, there is. There is a great documentation available. There is the Pro Git book, and it is available online for free. And that is how I learned Git. It shows everything with a command line. That's the great thing. So Git Basics is literally, these two are literally one workday, more or less. You can download this as PDF, as you can see right there. And then the branching is, I would say, yet another day. If you really go through it with a fine comb and look at all the different implications, what's going on. And then chapter 4 shows you how to use GitHub, GitLab, and all those different systems. And here's GitHub, a big chapter. This gives you some hints how you use it inside of a team. And Git tools, I hardly ever use. I haven't read this chapter, I admit it. I might have looked up things in that chapter, but these are like things like how to rewrite history. That's what usually an administrator does. You know, if you work with GitHub, you have UI to do these things. And there's so many great more input here, graphical interfaces, Git and Visual Studio Code, and so on and so on. I won't keep it from you that, of course, Delphi has a Git integration as well. We're not going to cover it today. We might look at it at a later time. But you can work with Git right out of your Delphi IDE if you wanted to. However, I'll be honest, I prefer a client that has been written for Git specifically. In my case, it's Git Kraken. But there's also Ian Barker favors GitHub Desktop, for example. I know a lot of other people that use, I think it's called Tower. That is a Mac-specific application. So for Delphi developers, I don't want to say anything wrong. Maybe there's also Windows client available for it. But Git Kraken is what I use because of this view. I got to be honest, that is my main reason why I use this. I also have all my examples for how it works. And you see that even I'm just a single guy here developing on my own on this example project, still I merge a lot, as you can see, and I have a lot of remote branches and I have some of them locally. So that is really, really helping me to work with these things easier than using the command line. The command line is, for me, really not an option that you can use long term. You need to decide which graphical user interface you're going to use. Tortoise Git is another one that integrates into the Explorer, but because it only integrates into the Explorer, it's also not my favorite tool in this case. Before I sum this up, how would you continue to work on your project? And that is easier than you think it is. If you have your graphical client with the console, of course, it's the same thing. What you can do, let's say we make a change here in XData server. I go into the main form and I make a couple of, that's all I do. Boom, that's it. I save it. And what you see right away here is that my Git Kraken says, hey, you have one file in a working directory. I can say view change. I can click on it and it even tells me the change that I made right here. And then I stage the file. And after staging the file, I make commit. And now this would be like iCandy. Okay? Boom, done. I would commit and the commit would go in here. That is how I would do it with Git Kraken. I can unstage easily without using the command line. What I can also do, I can delete, discard all the changes that I made compared to this. Okay, so on the command line, I haven't stashed anything. On the command line, I could once again, in my directory, I could say git status. I would get this as modified, and then you could do git add dot, which would then once again only add this one file, because see, modified this one, and then you can say git commit message iCandy, and then I think at this stage it suffices to say git push, because there is only one, there is only origin, and here you go. This is what the command line would look. That would be your daily work cycle. You know, you would basically make your changes. You say git add period, and then you say git commit with what you did, and then you say git push. Even if you don't want to do all the different check-ins or commits during the day, there's a lot of people that say, well, just start doing it once a day at the end of the workday, you know? And that's still better because with this git push, it's now on the server right here. If I go to GitHub, right here, GitHub, bum bum, and go back to my FLX OTP right here. The change is in here. iCandy, what was the change? And you can see what you changed very, very easily. And that's much, much better than just having a local copy on your computer and then something happens and you lose a day's work. And it's not that big of a deal to execute these two commands. You know, git add, and git commit. Those two you need, and then git push to basically send it to your GitHub repository. Before I let you go, I want to give you a hint what you basically could mount to your wall in front of you. This is a joke, of course, in case of fire, git commit, git push, exit building. And after watching this, how it works with Holger, you will fully understand this joke. That before you leave the building, commit your changes, push the changes to the server, exit the buildings, because your source is safe that way. You might have seen this sign before. I think it's pretty fun. And after today's session, if you've not used Git before, you understand the joke in detail now. I realized this was a very, very detailed explanation, and there was a middle part in there where I showed one of my real world projects that I'm working on with all the branches, that it might have been overwhelming. However, think about the core of this session. I've shown you how you can initialize a new Git repository locally on your system, and then I've given you the means to deploy more or less or copy these changes to another server that will allow you to store this. All in all, I hope zip files will be a thing of the past for you after seeing all the great advantages that you could have with Git, and that it's really not tied to any specific server. You can use it locally and it's still better than using a zip file. If you still need a zip file, and I'm not joking about this, you can still click here on code and you can download your source code as a zip file as is. So if you're scared of leaving it inside of this big versioning system, you can download it as a zip file and copy it in another safe place if you're still concerned that your source isn't safe as it was before in zip files. That just as a funny aside, that is still there and that is still available. If you like this content, please give us a thumbs up, because then we know that you think this is relevant for your daily work, for your development needs in Delphi. And even better, subscribe to us. Subscribe to TMS Software TV, and also, in addition to TMS Software TV, subscribe to Flix Engineering's YouTube channel, because you might be interested in how it works with Holger live. That gives you the ability to ask questions live. This is a channel right here, as I said, youtube.com/@flixengineering. Right now there is 3 different episodes that we broadcast live, and the video is available for you viewing as a recording, of course, but that takes away the ability to ask questions while we do this. Please subscribe, because that is what gives us the feedback that you're interested in future work, to put more work into these things, to give you the content. And remember, it's all free content. You're not paying us a dime to get this content on YouTube. Thanks again, and take care.